Hey everybody, it's Van. I promised you that when I reached the 30,000 word mark in Karilyne, Heart Cold as Ice, that I would come here and do a video, first for the patrons and then for the general audience, both of whom are very much appreciated, where I would read the first chapter, or at least the current draft of it, understanding that it'll change, a little bit as I continue on and go back and do the second draft and sometimes the third draft. And plus, I'm constantly going back and reworking stuff as I move forward as well. But this is where the first chapter stands right now. Now, a little context very quickly. This is the third volume, although the numbering doesn't really matter for this series for reasons that I think some of you already know. They're kind of standalone books. But this is the third volume in the what I call the Above series, which is within my overall Shattering / Legions universe, but it is very specifically the books that are in first-person point of view, from the point of view of one of the gods, right? Because in my Shattering science fiction, space opera, military sci-fi, whatever you want to call it, universe, in that universe, I always described at conventions, I always described it as sort of like the Iliad, like Homer's The Iliad, where you have the heroic soldiers fighting down at the human level, and that's mainly what the Legion books and Cold Lightning are about. And then you also have the gods, the sort of cosmic, Jack Kirby style, Thor, Loki, Asgardian type, but they're my own pantheon, god beings. And sometimes they're involved with the humans, with the mortal realm, and sometimes they're off doing their own thing in the godly plane, which is the Golden City, or in the below, right? So this series is called The Above. The first volume is Lucian, Dark God's Homecoming, probably my best reviewed, most popular book, which tells the story of the Loki-style character, kind of a, he calls him, he's supposed to be the god of evil, but really he's sort of like Loki. He's the trickster god, never really satisfied, very ambitious, and rubs everybody else the wrong way. That's the first book. And then the second volume is a prequel, which is BARANAK, Storming the Gates. And that one takes place much, much earlier in the history of the Shattering, and in fact, it's probably the earliest. I think it's probably the earliest in the entire chronology of all of my Shattering universe, and it takes place and gives the origin of the gods themselves. Where did they come from? Now, in Karilyne, I really have two purposes in mind with Karilyne. One is to use as the first-person main character, finally, this awesome character who I think she was a standout part of Lucian. She's a supporting character in Lucian in a couple of chapters, and she also shows up a couple of times to very great effectiveness in Legion 3: Kings of Oblivion. And I was so pleased in particular with how that came out that I really wanted to fast track getting her own book. It's also the first time I've written a female character as the point of view character. Now, it's not the first time I've written female characters as the main character. If you're familiar with my Sentinels books, I've written 9 novels where Lynn Lee, Pulsar, is the main character, and 2 short stories where she's the main character. But it's the first time that when I'm typing I did something, it's a woman rather than a man. So my daughter asked me the other day, Mira asked me, has that been messing me up? Has that been what's making this book come along slower? And I said, I thought it would, but no, it hasn't really affected it at all. There are other factors that have made this book come along slower. Now, I said that there were two reasons I wanted to go ahead and get this book done. One is because she's an awesome character, I think, and I wanted to get her out there. But also because this book is turning a major corner in the Shattering universe. I've been, those that have read it, I've been building up to something all along. It's been clear that something not so good is coming, right? We've seen hints of it all along, particularly in Cold Lightning, the novella and the comic book based on it. Well, Karilyne takes a major step forward in moving us toward the big finish, which I don't know when that'll be along. I just keep plugging along at these things, trying to work my way through this entire vast story. So, but this book definitely advances the ball down the field a great deal in the overall plot, because it takes place a good while after Lucian, and it takes place roughly the same time, maybe slightly after the Legion trilogy and Cold Lightning. So there are cameos, there are guest appearances in this book. It occurs to me that when people first read Lucian, none of the characters were familiar, and so all the guest appearances were by brand new characters. Whereas in this book, there are going to be a number of guest appearances, and if you've been reading along, you will have seen most of these characters before. All right, so without further ado, let me go ahead and read for you Chapter 1 as it currently stands of Karilyne, Heart Cold as Ice. And I will not try to do a woman's voice. I'm just going to read it in my normal voice. And you can imagine that it's like basically, I've described her as Wonder Woman crossed with Sif from Thor, as done by Jack Kirby or Jim Starlin. So, all right, here we go. Karilyne, Heart Cold as Ice. 1. And then that deep, endless night faded, and I was awake, though the cold stone beneath me made me wish I were still asleep, still wreathed in reassuring dreams and not dark, disturbing reality. My eyes open, I rolled over and sat up. The black of sleep had vanished, but now I found myself surrounded entirely by gray. Only the faintest of dim, ambient lighting allowed me to see anything at all. Instinctively, my hand went for my sword at my hip. Instead, my numb fingers brushed only the cold silver metal and black leather of the warrior's garb I always wore, that which was a part of my aspect. My sword and its scabbard were missing. Not panic, not yet, if at all, I being who I am, but a measure of concern took root within my mind and began to grow. I spoke the question aloud. Where am I? My voice came back to me as a flattened echo. It sounded hollow to me, unreal. It put me further into a state of unease. My first and instinctive reaction is always to go on the offensive. Lacking my sword, I reached out again, patting the hard surface on either side of me. As I suspected, my axe was missing as well. My axe. Anger rose within me now. I had been disarmed against my will. Was I imprisoned? Had I been abducted? Was I being detained somehow? If so, by whom? Questions. I hate questions. I prefer action, direct, unyielding action. Mysteries to me are an annoyance. Show me my objective, reveal to me my adversaries, and I will deal with them in short order. But this, infuriating, impossible. Was I not Karilyne, goddess of the Golden City, silver lady of the icy wastes, respected by all and rightly feared by most? I took some slight comfort in the fact that I at least knew who I was, but how had I come to be here in this tiny cell? That I could not remember. Enough of this. I stood and looked about. The grayness extended in every direction. It was like being lost in a dense fog bank at twilight. Walls, floors, ceiling, all were utterly obscured. Only the bench-like raised stone surface upon which I had lain was visible, and it appeared hazy and indistinct despite being so close by. Effectively blind, I raised my right arm in front of me, moving my hand about. I felt nothing, touched nothing. Frowning, I turned in a slow circle until my fingertips brushed against more of the cold, smooth stone to my left, this time in the form of a wall. Closing my hand, I rapped my knuckles against it, hard, solid. I followed it along slowly for only a short distance before I came to a corner. The wall turned left, and I followed it again. Another corner, quickly. I continued this action until I had traced the entire perimeter of the small square space that confined me. It was a cell, that much was obvious. Someone had locked me within a cell. Enough! Furious, I brought my right hand up again, but this time I reached within myself, reached for the power, the cosmic energy that flowed from the fountain of my city and radiated outward across all the levels of the above and all the depths of the below, empowering those of my kind, enabling us to feel the texture of the world around us and, if we desired, tear it asunder, creating portals for travel amongst these realms. My intentions were to create a doorway to another dimension and simply walk through it and out of this confinement. I reached for the power, but it did not answer my call. To my surprise, no portal materialized before me, not even the usual sparkle in the air that preceded it. To my greater astonishment, I could not even feel the power coursing around me. Still, I was not afraid. Angry? Yes. Enormously angry. I wanted my axe. One way or another, it could have freed me, either by ripping open the walls separating this universe from another, or by simply smashing the actual stone walls that confined me. No wonder my captors had taken it. One option yet remained. Closing my eyes, I laid my right hand flat against the nearest wall and breathed in and out slowly, reaching again for the power. I intended to draw what I could from the environment around me and allow it to flow back out, channeling it in the way I am able. Cold. Cold. Seconds passed, but the temperature in the room did not drop in any noticeable way. No ice formed on the wall. The constant, nearly subliminal, low-level buzz that marked the power, always awaiting my call, had vanished. In its place reigned only silence and an awful, empty void within myself where it had dwelt. The wall did not feel any colder, but I realized then that my hands did. My hands. How could that be? I never feel the cold. By my very nature and because of my aspect, it never bothers me. It is my tool, my weapon, mine to command. So I found it peculiar and troubling when the flesh across my arms and chest suddenly broke out in goose pimples and a demon chill moved through my core. I shivered. A sick, sinking feeling crept over me then as I began to suspect just where I might be. I dropped back onto the bench and leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, running my hands through my long, thick raven tresses. How had I come to be here? What could I remember? Little. My thoughts were a jumble. I realized for the first time then that my head was filled with a sort of numbness, a low-level but persistent static. It had been there since I'd awoken, invasive and oppressive, but I hadn't noticed it, so distracted was I with my plight. Forcing the distraction aside, slogging through my own mental processes like walking through waist-deep mud, I thought back to the last of my memories before awakening here. A visitor. I had been visited by someone. A soldier. Yes, an officer. A general from one of the little human empires. And by someone else. Someone I could not immediately recall, save as a vague presence. No matter. The point of the visit came back to me in a rush, and all began to fall into place. I was lounging on the southern balcony of the upper level of my ice castle when Mirana came to me and announced the visitor's arrival. In times past, I had been more discerning in just whom I allowed to approach my world and my refuge. But for centuries now, no one had bothered me, and thus I had allowed my defenses to grow lax. The starship had dropped from the hyperspace layer of the low above and appeared in orbit, then immediately zoomed down on a direct course for my property. They didn't have to search the entire planet's surface, Mirana stated, frowning. They knew precisely where we are. I regarded my alien Dianari prince. I'm not going to edit this. I will make mistakes occasionally. I regarded my alien Dianari disciple, tall and lithe, with large dark eyes and straight platinum blonde hair, and I nodded absently. A single ship? Yes. Any identification? The ship is registered to the 3rd Legion of the Anatolian Empire. I pursed my lips. The 3rd Legion. That was interesting, at least. Have they shown any signs of hostility? She shook her head. Not so far. Very well, allow them to land. I will grant a brief audience. I stood, lifted my sword belt from a side table, and fastened it about my waist. For their sake, I hope they intrude upon my time with matters of some import. I reached over and grasped the haft of my axe from where it leaned against the ice wall. It was cold and dark silver, double-bladed and very heavy. Or else. My voice trailing away, I strode for the grand hall. Marana hurried along ahead of me to carry out my orders. Speak, I commanded, and my voice echoed from the sheer walls and columns of ice that towered high above us. Lady Karilyne, the mortal said, bowing, I thank you for your hospitality. He straightened. I believe what I have to say will be of Wow. He straightened. I believe what I have to say will be of considerable interest to you. I sat back on my throne of ice and regarded this man. I am no judge of human ages and lifespans, but he appeared to me to be older, perhaps in his late 50s. He was bald, had a blunt nose, and wore the green and white dress uniform of the 3rd Legion, a military order among the mortals I was more familiar with than most. His insignia revealed his rank to be that of a general. Behind him stood a taller figure wearing a light blue cloak and hood. The hood was pulled up and far forward, completely obscuring the person's face, but revealing intricate filigree designs in silver and gold wrought upon it. Living as I do in a castle made entirely of ice, I am used to seeing my very rare visitors bundle themselves up for warmth, but something about this person drew my attention more than most, though why, I could not yet say. I glanced over at Marana, where she stood off to my right, but her expression was as always flat and unreadable. The human began to speak again, to introduce himself. I am General Yevgeny Vostok of 3rd Legion, called by some the Cold. I have come to... Little did I care for his name or affiliation. I interrupted him. And who is that standing behind you? Vostok's mouth was open, having been cut off and probably unaccustomed to it. He blinked, then turned back to the other as if to ask permission to introduce him. The other ignored him, reached up with pale fingers, and drew the hood back. That action revealed a thin face with pale skin and curly blonde hair. He could almost have passed for a Dainari, but he was not. I knew him instantly. Kevlar, I said. Karilyne, he replied, a slight smile touching his lips. It has been too long. I could have disputed that remark. I did not feel nearly enough time had passed since I had last been forced to interact with my brother and sister gods, but I let it pass. Instead I asked, Why come you here to my world and in the company of this mortal? Vostok was looking from Kevlar to me and back. I was just about to address that, he stammered. By all means, Kevlar stated with a serene smile. This surprised me, but if the blonde god preferred a human to speak for him, I would not object. I returned my gaze to the general. Yes, my lady, he began again, I have come to make you an offer as touching the late BARANAK. I stiffened. Whatever warmth had crept into my body fled, leaving only that which is cold as ice. He waited, seemingly oblivious to the reaction he had touched off within me. My hands tightened on the armrests of my throne. BARANAK. The general nodded. Our glorious, golden god of battle, dead and gone all these millennia. Yes. My eyes were narrow slits now. I'm certain some coloring showed even through my skin, pale as snow. Slowly, I started to rise. Kevlar saw and perceived what Vostok did not. He stepped forward, his serene expression at last dissolving. Karilyne, wait, hear him out. You will find this of great... Get off my world, I told them. My fingers closed around the haft of my axe where it rested against the side of the throne. Both of you, now, or my wrath will be terrible to behold." Kevlar was frowning now, and he appeared uncertain as to how to proceed. He backed away a step. The human, however, stood his ground. This both angered and puzzled me. Could he believe so much in what he had come here to tell me that he was willing to risk my legendary wrath? "My lady," he said, his eyes moving momentarily down to my axe, where I now carried it in my right hand. We understand that Baranak meant a great deal to you, that he remains a sensitive subject for you, that we risk invoking your anger by even mentioning his name, but I believe you will want to hear this." I continued to stare back at him, curious now where he was going with this, how vast his impudence could possibly be, how far it could reach. He was like an insect one prepares to crush, only to see it shouting defiantly back in its own language as the foot begins to descend. I could not help but be intrigued by his audacity, his boldness. Marana took a step forward, defensive of me, dutiful as she had been since the day I'd found her in the city and brought her into my service. With a quick look, I halted her. For a long moment no one moved, no one said a word. "Speak then," I said at last, my voice low and flat. "Save yourself, if you can." Vostok frowned deeper at this, but shook it off and spoke in a strong, firm voice. "Certain information has come to me recently as head of the 3rd Legion," he said, and Kevlar here has confirmed much and added more." I glanced at the blond god, but his expression was impassive once again. "Yes," I prompted impatiently. "In short," Vostok said, "I believe we can bring Baranak back." I stared back at him. I blinked. "Back?" "Back, yes, back to life, back to corporal reality." I considered where on his body my first axe blow would strike. "It is true, Karilyne," Kevlar said quickly, moving forward. He knew me better than most, certainly better than some human soldiers ever could. He surely sensed the outrage and the potential violence building within me. "Think about it, the chance to have Baranak back among the living." My expression souring, I looked away and shook my head slowly. "What madness is this?" I asked, my voice at first low and distant, then turning back on them fully. "What madness?" They spoke then, first one and then the other, making their case. They talked of crystal gemstones and of residual traces of energy and of the fountain in the Golden City. They talked of those things and more, and I ignored most of it. At the end, when they had finished their technical explanations, I simply asked, "Why?" Both of them regarded me with surprise. "Even were it true," I asked, "why would you care? What benefit for either of you to have the god of battle back among us?" "Why?" Kevlar repeated my question. "Why shouldn't we?" he asked by way of counter. "Why not right the monstrous wrong done to our great god of battle? He sacrificed himself to save all of us. Now perhaps we can return the favor." "You have but to accompany us to the location where we have been making our preparations," Vostok added. He might have said more, but after turning to Kevlar and seeing something in the god's expression, he fell silent. For my part, I stared away to my right, through the tall crystalline windows at the barren landscape, the barren snowscape beyond, my mind 1,000 years and a universe away. No one spoke for what seemed like half of eternity, but of course it could not last. "Will you not at least consider," Kevlar began again. I interrupted him. "Leave my presence. Go back to your ship." Vostok spoke up then. "You will not even allow us to—" "I will allow you to leave here alive, mortal," I stated. "Be grateful." My eyes moved from Vostok to Kevlar, and I noticed then that he was staring at my axe, and he no longer seemed intimidated by it. To the contrary, for a moment I thought I detected a different sort of interest in his eyes, a coveting perhaps. Then he looked away from it. Why wouldn't he covet it? Only a few of the ancient weapons remained. Vostok was clearly torn. It was obvious he did not wish to openly defy me and invite my wrath down upon him, but he also appeared surprised that I was dismissing him and his companion so perfunctorily. He seemed genuine in his conviction that what he had suggested could indeed be accomplished. I frowned and licked my lips. Reluctantly, the two visitors turned and began to walk from the hall. I stopped them with a word. Wait. They looked back, their expressions questioning, hope blossoming in their eyes again. You may wait in your ship where it now rests for 1 hour, I told them. If I have anything further to say to you, I will call for you before then. Otherwise, leave and do not return. With that, I turned and departed the hall by the back way. Marana accompanied me, as did my doubts, and a sudden and unexpected uprising of hope. You will tell them no, of course, Marana said. You would never go along with such a scheme as... I am considering it, I stated, not meeting her eyes. Surprised at first, my disciple had the good sense not to argue with me, particularly about this. Instead, she hesitated, then nodded in acceptance and stood to the side as always, awaiting my orders. They were not long in coming. We will go with them, I decided. We will, Marana all but gasped. Yes, we will go and see for ourselves precisely what they are up to and hear what they have to say for themselves. We will inspect their facilities and examine their machines. I hefted my axe in my right hand. And then, if need be, I will smash it all to pieces, I added, as I descended the grand staircase and walked purposefully for the main entrance, and slay them where they stand. Marana, as always, followed me out. I doubt she believed what I was saying any more than I believed it myself. All right, so that is Chapter 1 of Karilyne, Heart Cold as Ice. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to finishing it. I'm looking forward to getting it out to the public so that you can read the whole story and find out what's going to happen next and what happens with Karilyne and with Marana and the other characters that pop up occasionally. This is, as with all first-person stories, excuse me, hold on a second. As with all first-person stories that I write anyway, this is a travelogue, right? You follow one character as they go from point A to B to C to D all the way to the end. And, you know, the fun comes in introducing new characters and new situations along the way that they have to deal with and overcome and that challenge them on the way to their final goal. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing to add those. The book, as you know, obviously, the book stands at about 30,000 words now. And I've gotten Karilyne and her guest stars, shall we say, a fair distance along, but they have a long way to go yet. So I'm going to say the book is probably about a third done with the first draft. And maybe when I get to 60,000, maybe I'll read you Chapter 2. All right? So I hope you enjoyed this. And as always, find everything I do at www.plexico.net, plexico.net, or at whiterocketbooks.com, or just look on Amazon. It's on paperback, it's on Kindle, it's on Audible, it's all there. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon.